AU made $10 million helping travelers' insurance screw asbestos victims. You want to talk about my corruption? Donald Trump's voice cut across the CNN town hall stage. Elizabeth Warren, who'd been walking off after her own segment, froze mid-step. The audience, 200 people who just spent an hour applauding her attacks on corporate greed, went completely silent. Trump stood at the moderator's table holding a thick folder, not sitting in the guest chair like a normal town hall participant, standing like a prosecutor. "Mr. President, that's not." Anderson Cooper tried to regain control. "Too late. Senator Warren just spent 60 minutes calling me corrupt," Trump continued, voice carrying to every corner of the hall, telling these good people how I sold out to corporations, how I betrayed working families. So I think it's only fair we talk about the $10.3 million she made from the corporations she claims to fight. Anderson, can we bring the senator back out here since she wants to discuss corruption? Warren stood in the stage wings, her team clustered around her whispering frantically. Walk away and look guilty or go back out there and face whatever Trump had in that folder. The audience started chanting. Bring her back, bring her back. She had no choice. Cameras were rolling, millions watching. She walked back onto the stage trying to project confidence she didn't feel. I'm happy to address whatever baseless. Trump slapped the folder on the table between them. Documents spilled out. Contracts with corporate letterheads. Bank statements. Her signature visible on photocopied checks. Travelers' insurance. $212,000. You helped them avoid paying dying workers. Dow Chemical. $100,000. You helped them dodge environmental liability. LTV Steel, $90,000. You helped them cut pensions. He picked up each document as he spoke. Let it drop back to the table. That's not baseless, Professor. That's your signature, your bank account, your $10 million. Warren's mouth opened. Nothing came out. So before we talk about my corruption, Trump said, let's talk about yours. That morning, Elizabeth Warren woke in her $5.4 million home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The house, a beautiful Victorian in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods, was filled with morning light streaming through tall windows that overlooked perfectly manicured gardens maintained by a landscaping service. She paid $3,000 monthly to keep pristine. Her assistant had already delivered the newspapers, arranged them on the mahogany breakfast table in her sunroom, where she took her morning coffee from a French press made with beans that cost $40 per pound, imported weekly from a specialty roaster in Vermont. The New York Times had a front-page story about income inequality, featuring quotes from economists Warren had worked with during her academic career. Perfect timing for tonight's town hall, she thought, sipping her coffee and feeling the familiar rush of anticipation that came before big moments. She walked to her home office, past the bookshelves filled with academic texts about bankruptcy law and consumer protection, leather-bound first editions mixed with paperbacks she'd actually read and annotated in her precise professorial handwriting, past the framed photos of her with Barack Obama at the White House discussing financial reform, with Hillary Clinton at a campaign event where they'd both attacked Wall Street, with Bernie Sanders backstage at a progressive rally where they'd talked about revolution and change. These were her people, the progressive wing of the party, the fighters, the people who understood that the system was rigged against working families and needed warriors willing to take on the powerful. She'd positioned herself as that warrior for decades now. First as a bankruptcy law professor at Harvard studying how corporations exploited families in financial crisis. Then as the architect of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was supposed to protect those families. Finally as a senator who could use her academic expertise and moral authority to reshape American economic policy. Her chief of staff arrived at 7:30 with coffee and the briefing book for the CNN town hall. A thick binder containing statistics about Trump's policies, corporate tax cut data, cabinet member wealth calculations, regulatory rollback timelines, everything she'd need to prosecute the case against Trump's corruption. Let's go through the key attacks one more time, Warren said, settling into her leather chair. The same chair she'd sat in when writing her book about corporate corruption, titled The Two-Income Trap, which had sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and established her as a national voice on economic injustice. The same chair where she'd prepared for Senate hearings, where she'd grilled bank CEOs about their misconduct, where she'd become famous for devastating questioning that left corporate executives stammering and defensive. This was her space, her power base, the place where she transformed academic research into political ammunition. Attack 1, her chief of staff began, flipping open the briefing book to a section marked with red tabs indicating priority material. His corporate tax cuts. You say he gave $800 billion to corporations, and the wealthy while working families got nothing. You cite the specific companies that got the biggest cuts. You name names, make it personal. Apple got $47 billion. Amazon got $29 billion. ExxonMobil got $18 billion. These are companies that were already making record profits, already paying their CEOs hundreds of millions, already buying back their own stock instead of investing in workers or raising wages. Warren nodded, making notes in the margins of her briefing book in the same meticulous style she'd used for decades as a professor. Apple, Amazon, corporations that don't pay their fair share while working families struggle. I've got the numbers memorized. I can quote them without looking at notes. That's what makes it effective. When you can cite specific dollar amounts without hesitation, it creates the impression of absolute command of the material, of someone who's done the homework and knows the truth. Attack 2, her chief of staff continued, turning to another tabbed section. His cabinet of billionaires and corporate executives. Treasury Secretary from Goldman Sachs, Stephen Mnuchin, who made his fortune buying up foreclosed homes during the financial crisis and evicting families. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, worth $3 billion, who built his wealth restructuring bankrupt companies and cutting worker benefits. Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta, who gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart plea deal. You say he didn't drain the swamp. He filled it with corporate lobbyists and Wall Street executives who spent their careers exploiting the very people Trump claimed to fight for. I have all their names, Warren said, feeling energized now, her professorial instincts kicking in. Their net worths, their corporate ties, their histories of putting profits over people. This is what I do best, taking abstract concepts like corruption and making them concrete with specific examples, specific people, specific dollar amounts that voters can understand and get angry about. It's devastating because it's true, and because I can present it with the authority of someone who studied this for 30 years. Attack 3, her chief of staff said, moving to the final tabbed section. His broken promises to workers. He said he'd fight for them, said he'd bring back manufacturing jobs, said he'd make sure corporations couldn't ship jobs overseas anymore. Instead, he rolled back overtime protections that would have guaranteed time and a half pay for millions of workers. He weakened unions by appointing anti-labor officials to the National Labor Relations Board. He let corporations keep shipping jobs overseas, gave them tax incentives to do it actually, rewarded them for abandoning American workers. His trade policies have been disasters. His promises were lies. Warren was getting fully engaged now, her mind racing through the evidence she'd accumulated, the stories she'd heard from workers who'd lost jobs, from families who'd lost pensions, from communities that had been hollowed out by corporate decisions enabled by Trump's policies. This was what she did best, taking complex economic issues and making them personal, showing working families exactly how they'd been betrayed by a system that claimed to serve them but actually served the wealthy and powerful. And then I pivot to my vision, she said, already seeing how the town hall would flow, how she'd build from criticism to hope. What I would do differently. Actual structural change, not just tweaks around the margins but fundamental reform. Tax the wealthy, not at the rates we had under Clinton, but at the rates we had under Eisenhower when top earners paid 90% on income above a certain threshold. Break up big banks, not just regulate them better but actually break them into smaller pieces, so no single institution can threaten the entire economy. Empower workers, not just with better overtime rules but with seats on corporate boards, with real power over decisions that affect their lives. The whole economic patriotism framework. She continued, warming to her theme. The idea that corporations and the wealthy have responsibilities to the country that made their success possible, that they can't just extract wealth and give nothing back, that we need policies that put American workers first instead of multinational corporations and billionaire investors. This is a winning message because it speaks to people's lived experience of an economy that doesn't work for them, even as they see the wealthy getting richer and richer. Her communications director joined them at that point, pulling up polling data on her tablet, recent numbers that showed Warren's position in the potential 2028 presidential field. "You're at 14% for 2028, she said, swiping through graphs and demographic breakdowns. Third place behind Newsom and Whitmer, but your favorables with progressives are strong, 83%. If you nail this tonight, if you really land the anti-corruption message, you can move up, maybe into first place. The progressive base is looking for someone who will actually fight, not just talk about fighting. Someone with credibility on economic issues. That's you." Warren felt the familiar rush, the same feeling she'd had before big Senate hearings, before her Consumer Financial Protection Bureau testimony, where she'd laid out the case for creating a new federal agency to protect consumers from predatory financial practices. Before every moment when she got to be the crusading professor taking on the powerful. This was her identity, what she'd built her entire career around. The idea that she was the person with the expertise and the courage to challenge systems that everyone else just accepted as inevitable. "What time is Trump's segment?" she asked, already thinking about how to position her attacks so they'd dominate the news coverage even after Trump took the stage. 8:30. You go first at 7. So you set the narrative. He spends his whole time responding to you. You control the terrain. This is the ideal setup because by the time Trump comes out, the audience will already have heard an hour of detailed evidence about his corruption, his broken promises, his betrayal of working families. He'll be playing defense from the first question. "Perfect," Warren said, allowing herself a smile of satisfaction. She'd learned this in academia where she'd spent nearly 30 years before entering politics, first at Rutgers Law School, then at University of Houston, University of Texas, University of Michigan, University of Pennsylvania, finally Harvard where she'd taught for 19 years and become one of the most prominent bankruptcy law scholars in the country. Whoever frames the debate wins the debate. If you can define the terms, establish the assumptions, set the parameters within which the discussion happens, you've already won even before your opponent starts talking. She would frame tonight as a referendum on corporate corruption, on Trump's betrayal of working families, on the fundamental question of whose side you're on in an economy where the wealthy keep getting wealthier while working people struggle. By the time Trump took the stage at 8:30, the audience would already be primed to see him as the villain, the corporate tool, the con man who'd promised to help workers and then helped corporations instead. He'd have to spend his entire segment defending himself against her accusations, explaining away his corporate tax cuts, justifying his billionaire cabinet, excusing his broken promises. What Warren didn't know, couldn't have imagined as she sat in her expensive Cambridge home drinking her expensive coffee and preparing her attacks, was that at that exact moment 300 miles away in New York, Trump was in his own preparation session. And it wasn't about defense. It was about offense. He wasn't preparing to respond to her attacks. He was preparing to destroy her with evidence she didn't know he had. Trump Tower, 68th floor. The office overlooked Central Park, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Manhattan that only extreme wealth could purchase. Trump sat at the head of his conference table, a massive piece of furniture made from single piece of mahogany that had cost more than most Americans made in a year. Surrounded by his campaign team, his lawyers, his opposition research staff, and several thick binders of research that had taken months to compile. "Show me what we have on Warren," he said. "No small talk. No preliminaries, just business." This was how Trump operated in private, not the bombastic reality TV personality, but the calculating businessman who'd built a real estate empire by knowing more about his opponents than they knew about themselves. His lead opposition researcher, a former investigative journalist who'd spent 20 years digging into corporate corruption for major newspapers before Trump hired her away with a salary that was 3 times what journalism paid, opened the first binder. Senator Elizabeth Warren, age 74, senator from Massachusetts since 2013. Before that, Harvard law professor for 19 years teaching bankruptcy law and commercial law. Her brand is consumer advocate, champion of working families, the woman who takes on corporate greed and fights for economic justice. She built this brand through academic work, through her books about bankruptcy and financial crisis, through her advocacy for creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, through her Senate campaigns and presidential run. I know her brand, Trump said, cutting through the preliminary summary. Everyone knows her brand. That's what makes her dangerous because people believe it. They think she's different from other politicians, think she's the principled professor who can't be bought. I want to know what's behind the brand. What's the reality versus the image? The researcher smiled, the expression of someone who'd found gold in the research mine. That's where it gets interesting, she said, pulling out contracts, real documents, not summaries or allegations but actual signed agreements. Between 1995 and 2012, while she was a Harvard professor positioning herself as a consumer advocate and champion of working families, she made $10.3 million working as a consultant and expert witness for corporations, not small companies or nonprofits or public interest groups. Major corporations, the exact kind of corporations she now attacks in her speeches. She pulled out the first contract, Travelers Insurance letterhead visible, Warren's signature at the bottom, payment terms clearly stated. Travelers Insurance hired her in 1995. They were facing massive asbestos liability at the time, potentially billions in claims from workers who'd gotten mesothelioma from asbestos exposure in their facilities. Thousands of workers, many of them dying, many of them with families who needed money for medical bills and living expenses. Travelers was their insurance company, the company that was supposed to pay their claims. But Travelers was looking for ways to minimize what they'd have to pay, so they hired Professor Warren as their expert witness in bankruptcy proceedings. Paid her $212,000, which was enormous money in 1995, equivalent to maybe $500,000 today when you adjust for inflation. Her job, and this is documented in court records from the bankruptcy case, was to help them restructure in a way that minimized what they'd have to pay to dying workers. She provided expert testimony about how bankruptcy law could be used to cap asbestos liability, how they could create trusts that would pay out less than full value, how they could protect the company's assets while limiting what victims received. Trump leaned forward, his hands folded on the table, his expression intense. She helped an insurance company avoid paying asbestos victims, workers who were dying. That's what the Harvard professor did for $212,000. Exactly, the researcher confirmed. And that's just one example. We have 17 years of this. She was the hired gun for exactly the kind of corporations she now attacks in speeches. After Travelers came Dow Chemical in 1996. The researcher pulled out another contract, another corporate letterhead, another Warren signature. Dow had a chemical plant in Midland, Texas that leaked toxic chemicals into the groundwater. People in the surrounding community got sick. Cancer rates spiked. Children were born with defects. Dow was facing massive environmental liability, potentially hundreds of millions in cleanup costs and victim compensation. They hired Professor Warren to help them minimize their environmental liability during bankruptcy restructuring. Paid her $100,000. Her expert testimony helped them avoid paying full value to the victims, helped them structure a settlement that protected Dow's assets while leaving victims with less than they deserved. Then came LTV Steel in 1998. The researcher continued, pulling out more contracts. Steel company going through bankruptcy. They had pension obligations to workers who'd spent 30, 40 years building that company. Steelworkers who'd been promised pensions, who'd planned their retirements around those promises, who'd sacrificed higher wages during their working years in exchange for retirement security. LTV hired Professor Warren as their expert witness to help them cut those pensions during bankruptcy. Paid her $90,000. Her testimony helped them restructure in a way that reduced what they owed to workers, helped them break promises they'd made to people who'd given their entire careers to the company. The researcher spread more contracts across the table like a card dealer showing a winning hand. 6 contracts, 8 contracts, 10 contracts, all with Warren's name, all with corporate checks, all from companies trying to minimize their obligations to workers or victims or communities. United Airlines paying her to help them cut pilot pensions during bankruptcy. General Electric paying her to help them restructure environmental liabilities. Textron paying her to help them avoid paying full value to victims of defective products. On and on, case after case, client after client, $10.3 million over 17 years. Trump sat back, absorbing the information, seeing the political ammunition for what it was. She's built an entire career attacking corporate corruption while she was working for corporations helping them avoid responsibility. The hypocrisy is perfect, almost too perfect. How much total, he asked, wanting the exact number, the number that would stick in people's minds. $10.3 million over 17 years, all from corporations, all while she was writing academic papers and giving speeches about how corporations exploit working families, all while she was positioning herself as a consumer advocate and champion of workers. She was literally helping corporations hurt workers while publicly claiming to protect workers. Trump smiled, not his public smile but his private one, the expression of a man who'd just seen how to win. That's beautiful hypocrisy. The kind people understand instinctively. You don't need to be a political scientist or an economist. You just need to hear the numbers and see the contradiction. She attacks corporations while making millions from them. Simple, devastating. What else? His lawyer took over, opening another binder. This one focused on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Warren's signature achievement, the federal agency she designed and advocated for. The CFPB, he said, was created in 2011 as part of Dodd-Frank financial reform after the 2008 financial crisis. Warren designed it, advocated for it, almost ran it before Republicans blocked her appointment, which is actually what launched her Senate campaign. She ran on the story of Republicans blocking her from running the agency she'd created, turned it into a narrative about powerful interests trying to stop her from protecting consumers. It's her signature achievement, the thing she's most proud of, the proof that she can actually create structural change and not just talk about it. And it's been a political slush fund since day one. Between 2011 and 2017, the CFPB forced banks to pay $5.4 billion in settlements for various violations of consumer protection laws. That sounds good on the surface. Banks breaking the law, forced to pay, consumers protected. But here's what Warren designed into the system. The lawyer pulled out settlement documents, official CFPB agreements with banks, showing where the money actually went. Instead of that money going to harmed consumers, the people who'd actually been charged illegal fees or sold fraudulent products, it was funneled to progressive activist organizations, not consumer protection groups, not independent nonprofits doing actual consumer education, but political organizations that lobby for Democratic candidates and progressive causes. La Raza got $300 million from CFPB settlements. Urban League got $270 million. National Council of La Raza, which later rebranded as Unidos, is a Hispanic advocacy organization that lobbies for immigration reform and mobilizes Latino voters for Democratic candidates. Urban League is an African American advocacy organization that endorses political candidates and mobilizes Black voters. These aren't consumer protection groups. They're political organizations, and Warren's CFPB funneled billions to them through bank settlements. Trump absorbed this, seeing the mechanism, understanding how Warren had weaponized a federal agency for political purposes. She built a government agency that forces banks to pay billions to her political allies. That's not consumer protection, that's corruption with a government seal on it. The lawyer nodded, pulled up organizational charts showing how the money flowed. Here's how it worked. Bank does something wrong, charges improper fees or sells fraudulent products. CFPB investigates, finds violations, negotiates a settlement. In a normal system, The settlement money would go to the specific consumers who were harmed. They'd get refunds or compensation. But Warren designed it differently. She created a category called Consumer Education and Community Services that allowed CFPB to direct settlement money to approved organizations instead of to victims. So instead of Bank of America refunding illegal overdraft fees to the customers who paid those fees, CFPB could force Bank of America to pay La Raza to do housing counseling. The customers who got charged illegal fees didn't get refunds. La Raza got millions to expand their operations and hire more staff to register Latino voters. Trump stood up, walked to the window, looked out at Central Park, thought about the political implications. That's money laundering, he said, using federal regulatory power to force banks to fund political organizations. She created a system where banks that break the law pay progressive groups instead of paying their victims. And all of it is perfectly legal because she designed it that way, wrote it into the rules when CFPB was created, made it part of the agency's structure from the beginning. The lawyer confirmed exactly. Treasury Department analyzed it 2 years ago, put out a whole report about it, found systematic political bias in where the money went. Every organization that got CFPB money was a left-wing group, not one conservative organization, not one neutral group, only progressive activists. The pattern was so obvious that even government investigators who aren't particularly political noticed it and documented it. Warren didn't just create an agency to protect consumers. She created a mechanism to funnel billions in settlement money to organizations that would support her political agenda. Trump turned back to the table, his mind working through how to present this, how to make it understandable to regular people watching a town hall. You show people that their bank paid millions to La Raza instead of refunding their illegal fees. You show them that Warren designed it that way. You show them that this is corruption disguised as consumer protection. Simple, clear, devastating. His campaign manager added the next piece, pulling out stock trading records, spreadsheets showing dates and amounts and patterns. Then there's her Senate trading, he said. She's been on banking committee since 2013, 11 years of getting classified briefings about upcoming regulations, about financial markets, about what the government is planning to do that will affect bank stocks and financial sector investments. Very valuable information, the kind of information that could make someone a lot of money if they traded on it. He pulled up Warren's trading records, publicly available information that senators are required to disclose, but that nobody had bothered to analyze for patterns until Trump's team did it. Let's look at the pattern, he said, showing the data on a laptop screen. March 2015, she attends a classified banking committee briefing about new credit card regulations. The briefing details what the regulations will say, how they'll affect credit card companies, whether they'll be favorable or unfavorable to industry profits. 3 days later, she buys $20,000 of Visa stock. 1 week after that, the regulations are publicly announced. They're very favorable to credit card companies, much less restrictive than anticipated. Visa stock jumps 12%. She makes $2,400 profit in 8 days. Trump looked at the trade, at the timing, at the obvious connection between classified information and personal profit. That's insider trading, he said simply. She traded on information she got in a classified briefing. That's the definition of insider trading, using non-public material information to make trades. July 2016, the campaign manager continued, showing another trade, classified briefing about European banking crisis and how it's going to hit U.S. banks. 2 days later, she sells $50,000 of financial sector stocks. 1 week later, the crisis hits publicly. Stocks drop 15%. She avoided losing $7,500 because she sold before the public knew about the crisis. Again, she traded on classified information. Trump listened as they went through more examples, each one following the same pattern. Classified briefing about regulations or market conditions or financial sector developments. Trade within days. Profit or avoided loss when the information became public. September 2017, November 2018, April 2019, on and on. We analyzed all her trades during her time on banking committee, the campaign manager said. 23 trades that came within 5 days of classified briefings. 23 times she traded right after learning information the public didn't have. And all 23 times she either made money or avoided losses. The probability of that happening by chance is essentially zero. This is systematic insider trading. Trump returned to his seat, pulled the laptop closer, looked at the evidence. So she made $2.4 million from insider trading while serving on banking committee. Made it by trading on classified information she got from her Senate position. And she did this while giving speeches about how corporate executives who trade on insider information should go to jail. His lawyer confirmed the analysis. Securities and Exchange Commission has clear rules. You cannot trade on material non-public information. Members of Congress tried to create an exemption for themselves under something called speech or debate clause, claiming that their legislative work was protected. But the Stock Act in 2012 closed that loophole, made it explicitly illegal for members of Congress to trade on non-public information they learned through their official duties. Warren's trading pattern violates the Stock Act. She sat in classified briefings where she learned what regulations were coming, which banks were in trouble, which policies would help or hurt financial companies. Then she traded on that information, made herself $2.4 million doing it over 11 years on banking committee. The timing is so consistent, the pattern so obvious, that SEC has actually opened an investigation. That's not us making allegations. That's the Securities and Exchange Commission looking at potential insider trading by a United States senator. Trump absorbed all of it, the corporate consulting, the CFPB slush fund, the insider trading, seeing how it all fit together into a comprehensive picture of corruption that contradicted everything Warren claimed to be. This is perfect, he said. She's built her entire career on attacking corporate corruption and corporate greed in corporations that exploit workers. And she's done all of it while making millions from corporations, while funneling billions to political groups through a federal agency, while trading on classified information for personal profit. The hypocrisy is total. His campaign manager asked the key strategic question: how do we deploy this? Do we release it before the town hall, let the media cover it, force her to respond in her segment? Trump shook his head. No, let her have her full hour. Let her attack me, let her think she's winning, let her use all her prepared material about my corruption and my corporate cabinet and my broken promises. Let her think she's dominated. Then during my segment, I bring all of this out, and I ask CNN to bring her back on stage to respond. His team looked at each other, uncertain. That's not how town halls work, his lawyer said. She'll already be done, she'll be backstage, probably getting ready to leave. Exactly, Trump said. But when I start showing this evidence, when I start holding up her contracts and her trading records and her settlement documents, CNN will bring her back because it'll be the biggest story of the year and their ratings will explode. And she won't be able to refuse without looking guilty, without looking like she's hiding something. So she'll come back out and she'll have to answer live on camera with no preparation, no spin team crafting responses, no time to figure out how to explain the unexplainable. It's completely unprecedented, his campaign manager said, seeing the audacity of it, the risk but also the potential reward. Good, Trump replied. Unprecedented gets ratings, gets coverage, gets people talking. And more importantly, it means she can't prepare. She thinks tonight is about her attacking me and me defending myself. She has no idea I've spent 2 months investigating her entire financial history and that I'm going to prosecute her with her own documents. She wants to talk about corruption. We'll talk about corruption, hers. His researcher asked the obvious question. What if she handles it well? What if she's somehow prepared for this? What if she has explanations that work? Trump shook his head, confident. She won't be prepared because she thinks she's untouchable. She thinks her academic credentials and her consumer advocate image protect her. She thinks nobody will dare challenge her on her own territory. She doesn't realize that I've been investigating her for 2 months and I have receipts for everything. Every dollar she made, every trade she placed, every settlement that funneled money to political groups. All of it documented with her signature, her tax returns, her official disclosures. He looked at the binders of evidence spread across his conference table, hundreds of pages of contracts, tax returns, trading records, bank statements, settlement documents, employment applications. All of it obtained legally through public records requests and FOIA requests and opposition research. All of it verified and documented and ready to deploy. Her entire career is built on attacking corporate corruption while secretly profiting from it, Trump said. Tonight America finds out who she really is. Not from Republican talking points or partisan accusations, but from her own records, her own signatures, her own words in legal documents she signed decades ago when she thought nobody would ever connect them to her political career. By early afternoon, Warren was in makeup at CNN's Atlanta studios, feeling confident, feeling prepared, feeling like tonight would be a defining moment in rebuilding her national profile after the disappointment of her 2020 presidential campaign. She'd reviewed her attacks until she could deliver them without notes. She knew her statistics, knew her examples, knew exactly how she'd prosecute the case against Trump's corruption. She'd practiced the righteous anger, the disappointed professor tone, the fighting spirit that resonated with working families who felt left behind by an economy that served the wealthy. Her team was excited, energized, talking about how this would relaunch Warren as the 2028 fighter, the one who'd stand up to corporate power, the one who'd learned from 2020 mistakes and come back stronger and more focused. This was their moment, their chance to remind America why Warren mattered, why her voice was essential, why her expertise and moral authority made her uniquely qualified to challenge the systems that exploited working people. At 6:30, she walked onto the stage for a final tech check, making sure the lighting was right, making sure she could see the audience, making sure her voice carried to every corner of the hall. The audience was filing in, 200 carefully selected voters, half Democrats who'd be naturally sympathetic, half independents who could be persuaded. Friendly enough territory for what Warren planned to do. CNN had promoted this for weeks, back-to-back town halls, Warren versus Trump. The contrast couldn't be clearer. The consumer advocate versus the corporate CEO. The Harvard professor versus the reality TV star. The champion of working families versus the billionaire who'd never worked an honest day in his life. 7 o'clock. Anderson Cooper walked out to applause, introduced Senator Warren with the respect due to a prominent member of the Senate and former presidential candidate. She took the stage to strong applause from the Democratic half of the audience, felt the energy washing over her, felt herself settling into her role. This was going to be good. This was going to remind people why they'd supported her, why they'd given her money, why they'd believed in her vision of structural change. Senator Warren, thank you for joining us tonight. Cooper's voice was professionally warm. Thank you for having me, Anderson, Warren replied, her professorial tone coming through naturally. I'm excited to talk directly to hardworking families about the challenges they're facing and how we can fix a system that's rigged against them. The phrase that had defined her political career, the system is rigged. It encapsulated everything she believed about American capitalism, about how corporations and the wealthy had tilted the rules in their favor while ordinary people struggled. The first question came from a young woman in scrubs who identified herself as an emergency room nurse. Senator, I'm a nurse. I work 50 hours a week, and I can barely afford rent in the city where my hospital is located. My student loans are crushing me. My healthcare costs are rising even though I work in healthcare. How do you plan to address income inequality? It was the perfect opening. Exactly the kind of question Warren had been preparing for. Exactly the kind of story that illustrated the broader economic problems she'd spent decades studying. That's exactly why I ran for Senate, Warren began, leaning forward in her chair, making eye contact with the nurse, her voice carrying empathy and anger in equal measure. Because I saw families like yours working hard, playing by the rules, doing everything right, doing everything society tells you to do, get an education, work hard, save money, be responsible, and still struggling, still living paycheck to paycheck, still one medical emergency away from financial disaster. While billionaires and big corporations pay less in taxes than you do, pay less as a percentage of their income than a nurse or a teacher or a firefighter. The system is rigged, and we need leaders who will unrig it, who will fight for structural change instead of just tweaking things around the margins. Applause from the Democratic section, scattered applause from some independents. Warren was warming up, finding her rhythm. Donald Trump gave $800 billion in tax cuts to corporations and the wealthy. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual number from Congressional Budget Office analysis. Apple, Amazon, the biggest companies in America, companies that were already making record profits, already paying their CEOs hundreds of millions in compensation, already buying back their own stock instead of investing in workers. They paid less in taxes after Trump's cuts than before. Meanwhile, working families like yours got crumbs. Maybe a few $100, maybe 1,000 if you were lucky, while corporations got billions. That's not economic policy, that's corruption. That's the government taking money from working people and giving it to corporations and the wealthy. Bigger applause now. Warren was hitting her stride, delivering the message she'd practiced, making it personal, making it concrete, turning abstract economic policy into a story about nurses who couldn't afford rent and corporations that didn't pay their fair share. For the next hour, she methodically prosecuted the case against Trump, his corporate cabinet, his billionaire advisors, his policies that helped the wealthy while claiming to help workers, his promises to bring back manufacturing jobs that never materialized, his promises to make sure corporations couldn't ship jobs overseas that he never kept, his promises to drain the swamp that resulted in the swampiest administration in modern American history, with more corporate lobbyists and industry executives in positions of power than any administration before it. She had statistics for everything: the exact number of jobs lost in manufacturing, the exact number of factories that closed, the exact amount corporations paid their CEOs while cutting worker benefits, the exact percentage of Trump's tax cuts that went to the top 1% versus the bottom 50%. She delivered it all with the authority of the Harvard professor who'd spent 30 years studying this, who knew bankruptcy law and corporate finance and economic policy better than almost anyone in America, who could cite studies and data and reports without looking at notes because she'd internalized it all. The audience ate it up. The Democratic half applauded enthusiastically after almost every answer. Even some independents seemed persuaded, nodding along, taking notes, looking like they were reconsidering what they thought they knew about Trump's policies. Warren could feel the momentum building, could feel herself dominating the narrative, could feel the town hall becoming exactly what she'd planned. A comprehensive takedown of Trump's corruption and broken promises delivered with academic authority and moral clarity. At 8:10, Cooper asked about her own policies, her own vision for economic reform. This was the pivot point Warren had prepared for, the transition from criticism to hope, from prosecuting Trump to presenting her alternative. "We need to fundamentally restructure our economy," she said, her voice rising with passion. "Not just tweak the tax code or adjust some regulations, but actually change the rules that govern how our economy works. We need to break up big banks so no single institution can threaten the entire financial system like they did in 2008. We need to tax wealth, not just income, because the ultra-wealthy make their money from investments and stock holdings that currently get taxed at much lower rates than working people's wages. We need to give workers seats on corporate boards like they have in Germany, so workers have a say in decisions about offshoring jobs or cutting benefits or prioritizing short-term profits over long-term stability. We need to ban stock buybacks, which are just a mechanism for corporations to inflate their stock prices and enrich executives instead of investing in their workers or their communities. We need antitrust enforcement that actually breaks up monopolies, instead of just letting corporations merge and consolidate until a handful of companies control entire industries. This is what I mean by structural change, Warren concluded. Not minor adjustments, but fundamental reform of how power and wealth are distributed in our economy. Because right now the game is rigged for those at the top, and no amount of hard work will change that until we change the rules. The applause was sustained, enthusiastic, exactly the response Warren had hoped for. By the time Cooper thanked her at 8:15, Her team was ecstatic. She walked off stage to continued applause, went straight to the green room where her staff was celebrating like they'd won something important. That was perfect, her chief of staff said, practically bouncing with excitement. You dominated. You set the whole narrative. Trump's going to spend his entire segment playing defense, responding to your attacks, trying to explain away his corporate tax cuts and his billionaire cabinet and his broken promises. You controlled the terrain completely. Warren allowed herself a smile, feeling the satisfaction of a well-executed plan. She'd done what she came to do. Reminded America why they couldn't trust Trump, why his policies had betrayed working families, why they needed someone like her who understood how the economy actually worked and had concrete plans to fix it. Positioned herself as the alternative, the fighter, the one who wouldn't be bought by corporate interests or billionaire donors. Let's get out of here, she said, gathering her things, checking her phone for the immediate media reaction which was already coming in positive from outlets she respected. I want to be on the road before Trump even starts. Don't want to give him the satisfaction of thinking I'm staying to watch him. But as she was putting her briefing book into her bag, checking that she had her phone and her notes, a production assistant knocked on the green room door, polite but insistent. Senator, Mr. Cooper would like you to stay in case there are any follow-up questions during Mr. Trump's segment. Warren's chief of staff frowned immediately, recognizing that this was unusual, that town halls didn't work this way. That's not standard, she said to the production assistant. She's done her hour. She fulfilled her commitment. The assistant looked apologetic but firm. I know, but Mr. Cooper specifically requested it, just in case there's any need for clarification or response to anything that comes up during President Trump's segment. Warren felt a flicker of unease, an instinct that something wasn't right about this, but she couldn't refuse without seeming like she was avoiding something or trying to dodge accountability. Fine, she said, trying to sound casual about it, trying not to let her team see that she was worried. I'll stay, but I'm not going back on stage unless it's absolutely necessary. She settled onto the green room couch, half watching the monitor as Trump walked onto the stage at 8:30, trying to appear disinterested but actually paying close attention to how he'd respond to her hour of attacks. Same stage she just dominated, same audience that had applauded her criticisms, same format she'd controlled. But Trump didn't sit in the guest chair like a normal town hall participant. He walked to the moderator's table where Cooper sat, set down a thick folder, and stood there like he was preparing to deliver a prosecution instead of participate in a discussion. That was odd, Warren thought, watching the monitor, feeling her unease growing. Why wasn't he sitting down? Why did he have that folder? What was he planning? Cooper tried to start normally, tried to maintain the standard town hall format. Mr. President, welcome. Our first question comes from, but Trump interrupted before Cooper could finish, before the first audience member could ask their prepared question. An audience member shouted from his seat, clearly impatient, clearly wanting to get to what everyone was thinking about. Mr. President, Senator Warren just spent an hour calling you corrupt, calling your administration corrupt, calling your entire career corrupt. What's your response to that? Trump picked up his folder, held it like it contained something important, something devastating. I'm glad she brought up corruption, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. Warren sat up straighter in the green room, suddenly alert, suddenly worried about where this was going. Because I have some documents here about her corruption that I think everyone would be interested in. Warren's chief of staff stood up, staring at the monitor. What is he talking about? She said, her voice rising with alarm. What documents? What is he doing? On screen, Trump was asking if Warren was still in the building, asking CNN to bring her back out, asking Anderson Cooper to interrupt the standard format and create a confrontation that nobody had planned for. Senator Warren has agreed to rejoin us, Cooper said after consulting with his producers. What? Warren's team erupted, everyone talking at once. You can't, her chief of staff said. This isn't how it works. You're done. You don't have to go back out there. But the production assistant was back, knocking again, more urgent this time. Senator, they're asking you to return to the stage. Mr. Trump says he has evidence he wants you to address. Warren's mind raced through the possibilities, through the calculation of what refusing would mean versus what going back out might mean. Refuse and look like she was hiding something, looked like she was afraid to face Trump, looked like she had something to be guilty about. The optics would be terrible. The story would be Warren flees rather than face Trump's questions. Or go back out there and face whatever Trump had in that folder, whatever evidence he claimed to have, whatever trap he'd set for her. The audience was chanting now. She could hear it from the green room even without the monitor's audio. Bring her back. Bring her back. The rhythmic demand growing louder, more insistent. She had no choice really, not if she wanted to maintain any credibility, not if she wanted to avoid looking guilty before Trump had even shown whatever evidence he claimed to have. She stood up, smoothed her blazer, checked her appearance in the mirror, tried to project confidence she didn't feel. "Let's get this over with," she said to her team, walking back down the hallway through the wings, onto the stage for the second time that night. The applause was polite but confused. This wasn't how town halls worked. This wasn't normal. People didn't know what to make of it. She took the seat across from Trump, maintaining her professional demeanor, her professorial composure, determined not to let him see that she was worried. "I'm happy to address whatever baseless accusations you're making," she said, trying to seize control of the narrative, trying to frame whatever came next as partisan attacks that could be dismissed. "But I want to be clear, this is completely inappropriate. This isn't how town halls work. This is an ambush." Trump opened the folder and Warren's world began to crumble with the sound of papers rustling, documents sliding across the table between them. He picked up the first document like he was handling evidence in a courtroom, which in a way he was. This was a trial. He was the prosecutor, she was the defendant, and 200 people were the jury. "Travelers Insurance," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "December 1995. They paid you $212,000. He held up the contract so the camera could see it, so the audience could see it, so everyone watching at home could see it. Warren's name clearly visible at the top, the amount clearly visible in the payment section. Her signature at the bottom, unmistakably hers, the same signature she'd been signing for 30 years. "You know what you were doing for them," Trump continued, not asking, stating. "Helping them avoid paying asbestos victims. These were working people, miners who'd dug asbestos out of the ground, construction workers who'd installed asbestos insulation, shipyard workers who'd repaired ships with asbestos components, people who got mesothelioma from asbestos exposure, a horrible disease where your lungs slowly fill with scar tissue until you can't breathe, until you drown in your own body's inflammatory response. Dying men who needed money for their medical bills, for their families who'd be left behind, for some dignity at the end of lives they'd spent doing hard physical labor that had killed them. And Travelers Insurance owed them that money," Trump said. "That was the whole point of having insurance. But Travelers hired you, Professor Warren, as their expert witness, and you helped them restructure their bankruptcy in a way that minimized what they'd have to pay, minimized what dying workers would get so Travelers could protect their corporate assets and their shareholder profits." He slid the document across the table to where Warren sat frozen. That was definitely her signature. That was definitely her contract. That was definitely money she'd received for work she'd done. Warren tried to regain her footing, tried to use her professorial authority to reframe what Trump was showing. "That was legitimate expert testimony in a complex bankruptcy proceeding," she said, her voice not quite as steady as she wanted it to be. "I provided analysis on bankruptcy law, which is standard practice for law professors. Many academics do expert witness work in areas where they have specialized knowledge. There's nothing improper about it." But even as she said it, she knew how weak it sounded, how much like excuse-making instead of explanation. "You were a hired gun helping an insurance company screw dying workers," Trump said flatly, brutally, cutting through her academic language with simple truth. "Let's not pretend it was anything else." He picked up another document before she could respond, before she could try to spin it differently, before she could deploy more professorial language to obscure what she'd actually done. "Dow Chemical, October 1996. They paid you $100,000. He held up another contract, another corporate letterhead, another clear payment amount, another unmistakable signature. Their plant in Midland, Texas had leaked toxic chemicals into the groundwater. Trump continued, telling the story in a way that made it real, that made people see the victims instead of just hearing about environmental liability. Trichloroethylene, a carcinogen that causes liver cancer and kidney cancer, leaked into the aquifer that supplied drinking water to the surrounding community. People in those neighborhoods started getting sick. Cancer rates spiked. Children were born with defects. Families that had lived there for generations suddenly had cluster after cluster of cancer cases. Dow was facing massive environmental liability, potentially hundreds of millions in cleanup costs and victim compensation. So they hired you to help them minimize what they'd have to pay. Hired the Harvard professor, the bankruptcy expert, the woman who would later position herself as a consumer advocate, to help them dodge environmental liability, to help them avoid paying for the damage they'd done to people's health and people's property and people's lives. Another contract slid across the table, another signature, another check deposited into her account. Warren's throat felt tight, felt like she couldn't get enough air, felt like the room was getting smaller. Environmental liability cases involve complex questions of causation. She tried to explain, falling back on the technical language of tort law, proving that specific health outcomes resulted from specific environmental exposures requires sophisticated statistical analysis and expert testimony about. And they involve corporations poisoning people and not wanting to pay for it. Trump cut through her explanation. And you helped them. You provided the expert testimony that allowed them to minimize their liability, that allowed them to pay less than they should have, that allowed them to protect their profits while people who'd been poisoned got less compensation than they deserved. He was relentless now, pulling document after document from his folder, each one a separate case, each one a separate corporate client, each one another example of Warren helping corporations avoid their obligations. LTV Steel, January 1998, $90,000. Steel company going through bankruptcy. They had pension obligations to workers who'd spent 30, 40 years building that company. Steelworkers who'd started at 18 years old, worked their entire adult lives in dangerous conditions, in blast furnaces that reached temperatures hot enough to melt metal, in rolling mills where one mistake could cost you a limb or your life, who'd been promised pensions, who'd been told if you work hard and stay loyal the company will take care of you when you're old, who'd sacrificed higher wages during their working years in exchange for retirement security. You helped LTV cut those pensions, Trump said, showing the contract, showing the payment, showing Warren's signature agreeing to provide expert testimony. Helped them avoid their obligations to workers who'd given their entire productive lives to the company. Helped them restructure in a way that let the company protect assets while workers lost retirement security they'd spent decades earning. He spread the documents across the table like a dealer spreading cards in a game where he held all the aces. 6 contracts, 8 contracts, 10 contracts, all with Warren's name, all with corporate checks, all from companies trying to minimize their obligations to workers or victims or communities. Between 1995 and 2012, Trump said, letting the timeframe sink in, you made $10.3 million consulting for corporations. Not just any corporations. Insurance companies trying to avoid paying dying workers. Chemical companies trying to dodge environmental liability. Steel companies trying to cut worker pensions. Airlines trying to reduce pilot retirement benefits. Dow Chemical, Travelers Insurance. United Airlines, LTV Steel, General Electric, Textron, the exact corporations you now claim to fight, the exact corporations you attack in speeches, the exact corporations you say are rigging the system against working families. He picked up her tax returns from those years, public records that he'd obtained legally through standard opposition research, returns she'd had to disclose as part of her presidential campaign financial transparency. Your income, Professor, public record. 1995 through 2012 shows exactly who was paying you, shows exactly where your money came from. Travelers Insurance, Dow Chemical, LTV Steel, all of them right there in black and white on your 1040 forms. You were on their payroll for 17 years. You made $10.3 million helping them avoid paying workers and victims. That's not characterization, that's fact. Those are your numbers from your tax returns. The audience was completely silent now, every single person watching Warren, waiting to see how she'd explain this, waiting to see if she could explain this, watching her face for signs of guilt or innocence or anything that would tell them whether Trump was telling the truth. Anderson Cooper tried to give her an opening, tried to maintain some semblance of fairness in what had become a prosecution. Senator Warren, how do you respond to these specific dollar amounts, to these specific contracts with your signature? Warren's mind was racing, her professorial training trying to find the argument, the explanation, the framework that would make this okay. She'd done that work decades ago when she was an academic, when she was a bankruptcy law professor building her reputation, when expert witness work was standard practice for law professors in her field. It was all legal, all proper, all accepted in academic circles as legitimate scholarly work that also happened to pay well. But Trump was making it sound like she'd been betraying workers, like she'd been on the wrong side, like she'd been helping the very corporations she now attacked. The amounts are being taken completely out of context, she said, her professorial tone wavering slightly, cracking under the pressure. In bankruptcy proceedings, courts require expert analysis on complex legal questions. Judges need to understand how bankruptcy law applies to specific situations, how to balance competing claims, how to structure reorganizations that are fair to all parties. I provided that analysis as a recognized expert in bankruptcy law. That's completely different from. It's exactly the same. Trump's voice cut across her explanation. Matter of fact, not angry, just stating facts that couldn't be disputed. You helped corporations avoid paying workers and victims. They paid you millions for that help. Now you stand on stages and attack those same corporations, call them greedy, call them corrupt, say they rigged the system against working people. But you were their lawyer, you were on their side. You were making millions helping them, helping travelers avoid paying asbestos victims, helping Dow avoid environmental cleanup, helping LTV cut worker pensions. He turned to address the audience directly, making eye contact with people scattered throughout the hall, making it personal, making it real. How many of you have dealt with insurance companies that wouldn't pay claims, he asked. Had your benefits cut, had your pensions reduced, had your retirement security taken away after years of work? Several hands went up throughout the audience. People who'd experienced exactly what Trump was describing. People who'd been victims of the kind of corporate behavior Warren claimed to fight against. She made $10 million helping them do that to you, Trump said, pointing at the raised hands, pointing at the real people who'd been hurt, helping travelers avoid paying asbestos victims, helping Dow avoid environmental liability, helping LTV cut pensions, making millions from corporations while they were hurting working people. And then she runs for Senate on a platform of fighting those exact same companies, claiming to be a consumer advocate, claiming to champion working families, claiming to understand their struggles because she studied bankruptcy and economic inequality. Trump pulled out another set of documents, thicker, more official-looking, documents with federal seals and bureaucratic formatting. Now let's talk about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, he said. Your baby, your greatest achievement, the thing you're most proud of. You designed it, you advocated for it. You wanted to run it until Republicans blocked you, which became your origin story for running for Senate. The agency that was supposed to protect consumers from predatory banks, supposed to make sure working families didn't get screwed by financial institutions. He opened the documents to show organizational charts, settlement agreements, financial flows. The CFPB was supposed to protect consumers from predatory banks, he repeated. And it did force banks to pay billions in settlements for various violations. Between 2011 and 2017, $5.4 billion in settlements. Banks that had charged illegal overdraft fees, sold fraudulent financial products, discriminated in lending, violated consumer protection laws. $5.4 billion paid out by banks that had broken the law. Sounds great, right? Trump said, letting the number hang there. Banks breaking the law, forced to pay, consumers protected. He paused, let the audience process that this sounded good, let Warren think maybe he didn't have anything devastating about CFPB. Except the money didn't go to consumers, he said. It went to political organizations. Warren jumped in immediately, trying to cut off this line of attack before it developed. That's completely false, she said, her voice rising with indignation. The CFPB has returned billions to consumers who were harmed by predatory lending and illegal banking practices. The agency has been enormously successful in protecting. Trump talked over her, his voice louder, more commanding, refusing to let her control the narrative. $5.4 billion went to left-wing activist groups, he said. Anderson, can we show this on screen? CNN's producers hesitated briefly, then put up a graphic showing organizational names and dollar amounts, information Trump's team had provided, information that was all public record but that nobody had bothered to compile until now. La Raza, $300 million. Urban League, $270 million. National Council of La Raza, $180 million. National Community Reinvestment Coalition, $150 million. Dozens of community organizing groups, housing counseling nonprofits, all progressive political organizations, all groups that endorsed Democratic candidates and mobilized voters for progressive causes. Warren's voice rose, trying to maintain her authority, trying to sound like she still controlled the narrative. Those are legitimate housing counseling organizations providing valuable services to underserved communities. They help people avoid foreclosure, help families understand their mortgage options, help. They're political organizations, Trump said flatly. La Raza lobbies for immigration reform and mobilizes Latino voters. Urban League endorses political candidates and organizes get-out-the-vote drives in black communities. These aren't consumer protection groups, they're activist organizations. He showed printouts from the organization's own websites, their own descriptions of their political activities, their own statements about mobilizing voters and advocating for policy changes and supporting progressive candidates. And you funneled $5 billion taxpayer dollars to them, Trump continued. Not your money, taxpayer money from bank settlements that should have gone to consumers who were harmed. He showed the mechanism, the flow charts his team had created showing how the system worked. Banks got in trouble for breaking consumer protection laws. CFPB investigated, found violations, negotiated settlements. Normal process would be the bank pays fines and returns money to the specific consumers who were harmed, the people who got charged illegal fees or sold fraudulent products. But Warren's CFPB didn't do that. Trump explained, walking the audience through the corruption. Instead, you created a category called consumer education and community reinvestment that allowed CFPB to direct settlement money to approved organizations instead of to victims. So instead of Bank of America refunding illegal overdraft fees to the customers who paid those fees, getting their money back, CFPB forced Bank of America to pay La Raza millions to do housing counseling. The customers who got charged illegal fees didn't get refunds. La Raza got millions to expand their political operations. Here's how it worked, Trump said, making it concrete, making it understandable. Bank does something wrong, charges improper fees, sells fraudulent mortgages. Maybe customers paid $50 or $100 or $500 in illegal fees. Normal settlement would be the bank returns that money to those customers. They get refunds. But Warren set it up differently. The bank could fulfill the settlement by paying approved organizations instead. So instead of giving you back your $100, the bank gave $100 to La Raza or Urban League. You got nothing. The political organization got the money. The bank could check the box saying they'd complied with the settlement. And Warren got to funnel billions to groups that would support her political agenda. Cooper interjected, trying to maintain some balance. Senator, is that an accurate characterization of how CFPB settlements worked? Warren was struggling now, trying to find the explanation that would make this sound legitimate. The CFPB settlement structure was designed to provide broad community benefit beyond just individual remediation. Consumer protection isn't just about returning money to specific victims. It's about preventing future harm through education and counseling and community services that the organizations that received funding were providing valuable services to communities that had been targeted by predatory lending. She continued, housing counseling helps people avoid foreclosure. Financial literacy programs help people make better decisions. Community reinvestment helps rebuild neighborhoods that had been devastated by the financial crisis. These were important public services that they were providing political activism, Trump said quietly, but his voice cut through her rising explanation. Treasury Department analyzed this 2 years ago, put out a whole report about it. He held up an official government document, not something his team had created, but an actual Treasury Department analysis from the previous administration. Found systematic political bias in where the money went. Every organization that got CFPB money was a left-wing group. Not one conservative organization, not one neutral group, only progressive activists. The pattern was so obvious that even government investigators who weren't particularly political noticed it and documented it. Trump said, "You designed a federal agency that could force banks to pay billions to your political allies. That's not consumer protection. That's a slush fund. That's corruption with a government seal on it. You created a mechanism to funnel taxpayer money through bank settlements to organizations that would support progressive candidates and progressive causes." That's what Treasury found. That's what the evidence shows. Warren tried again, her voice rising with anger or fear or both. The CFPB has protected millions of consumers from predatory lending and illegal banking practices. The agency has been enormously successful in. The CFPB has been a political money laundering operation, Trump interrupted. $5.4 billion to progressive groups that support candidates like you. You built it. You designed it. You made sure the settlement structure allowed this. It wasn't an accident or an unintended consequence. It was the plan from the beginning. Create an agency that could punish banks and reward your political allies at the same time. Trump moved to his next section before Warren could formulate a response, before she could find the words to make this sound less damning, before she could deploy her professorial authority to obscure what he was showing. He pulled out stock trading records, spreadsheets showing dates and amounts and patterns that his team had spent weeks analyzing. "Now let's talk about your work on the Senate Banking Committee," he said. "You've been on that committee since 2013, 11 years now. You get classified briefings, secret information about upcoming regulations, about financial markets, about what the government is planning to do that will affect bank stocks and financial sector investments. Very valuable information," Trump said. "The kind of information that could make someone a lot of money if they knew about regulatory changes before the public did, if they knew which banks were in trouble, if they knew which policies would help or hurt financial companies. The kind of information that insider trading laws are designed to protect, to keep from being exploited for personal profit." He showed the trading records, Warren's own disclosures that senators are required to file, documents that were public but that nobody had analyzed for patterns until Trump's team did exactly that. These are your stock trades, public information. Senators have to disclose them under the Stock Act. Let's look at the pattern. Cooper and the audience watched as Trump methodically went through trade after trade, each one showing the same pattern, each one demonstrating what his team had discovered. March 2015, Trump said, pointing to the first example on his spreadsheet. "You attend a classified banking committee briefing about new credit card regulations. The briefing details what the regulations will say, whether they'll be favorable to credit card companies or restrictive, how they'll affect industry profits. Very valuable information if you're thinking about buying or selling credit card company stock." 3 days later, Trump continued, pointing to Warren's trade disclosure. "You buy $20,000 of Visa stock." 3 days after learning in a classified briefing what the regulations will be. 1 week after that, the regulations are publicly announced. They're very favorable to credit card companies, much less restrictive than the industry had feared. Visa stock jumps 12%. You make $2,400 profit in 8 days. Because you bought before the public knew, the regulations would be favorable. Warren interrupted, trying to cut off this line of attack. "My investments are managed by a financial advisor who makes recommendations based on. These aren't in a blind trust," Trump said. "These are direct trades with your name on them. your decisions, your signature on the trade authorizations. Either you're going to claim you made the decision, or you're going to claim your financial advisor made the decision after you told him what you learned in classified briefings. Either way, it's insider trading. He kept going, showing more examples, building the pattern. July 2016, classified briefing about European banking crisis and how it's going to hit U.S. banks. 2 days later, you sell $50,000 of financial sector stocks, getting out before the crisis hits publicly. 1 week later, the crisis becomes public. Stocks drop 15%. You avoided losing $7,500 because you sold before the public knew about the crisis. Sold based on information you learned in a classified briefing. September 2017, Trump continued, showing another trade. November 2018, April 2019. Each time the same pattern. Classified banking committee briefing about regulations or market conditions or financial sector developments. Trade within days, usually within 48 to 72 hours. Profit or avoided loss when the information becomes public and affects stock prices. We analyzed all your trades during your time on banking committee, Trump said. 23 trades that came within 5 days of classified briefings. 23 times you traded right after learning information the public didn't have. And all 23 times you either made money or avoided losses. The probability of that happening by chance, Trump said, looking at the audience, is essentially zero. Nobody is that good at timing the market unless they're trading on inside information. This is systematic insider trading, using your position on banking committee to profit from classified information, violating the Stock Act, which specifically prohibits exactly this kind of trading by members of Congress. Cooper asked directly, "Senator, the timing does seem notable. Can you explain the pattern of trades following classified briefings?" Warren's face was flushed, her composure cracking under the relentless presentation of evidence she couldn't deny. "I don't personally manage every single trade," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "My financial advisor makes recommendations based on market conditions, based on economic analysis, based on information you give him from classified briefings." Trump cut in. "You attend classified banking committee briefings where you learn what regulations are coming, which banks are in trouble, which policies will help or hurt financial companies. Then you trade on that information or tell your financial advisor to trade on it. Either way, it's insider trading. Securities and Exchange Commission rules are very clear. You cannot trade on material non-public information. You sat in classified briefings where you learned exactly that kind of information. Then you traded on it. Made yourself $2.4 million doing it over 11 years. He held up a document with an official seal, not something his team had created but a real government document. SEC has opened an investigation into your trading because the pattern is undeniable. This isn't me making accusations. This is the Securities and Exchange Commission looking at potential insider trading by a United States senator, looking at whether you violated the Stock Act, looking at whether you used your position on banking committee to profit from classified information while publicly claiming to fight for working families. Warren tried to pivot to attacking him, tried to turn this back into a discussion of his corruption instead of hers. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice rising. "When you challenge the powerful, when you fight for working families, they come after you with baseless attacks and character assassination, and I'm not coming after you with anything except your own records," Trump said, his voice firm and steady. "Your contracts, your tax returns, your trading records, your settlement documents. Everything I've shown tonight is public information. Your signature on corporate contracts, your tax returns showing corporate income, your trade disclosures showing the timing of your stock purchases, your CFPB settlement agreements showing where the money went. I didn't make any of this up," Trump continued. "These are your documents, your decisions, your money. I just compiled them and showed them to people. If you don't like what that reveals about you, that's not my fault, that's yours." He pulled out the final section, employment documents and faculty listings from Harvard old diversity reports that showed how Warren had been categorized. "And we haven't even talked about Pocahontas yet," he said. The audience stirred at the nickname, some people gasping, some people laughing, Everyone knowing this was about the Native American heritage controversy that had dogged Warren for years. Warren's anger flared, giving her momentary energy to fight back. "That is a racist slur," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "And I will not sit here while you use racist language too." "It's not racist," Trump said calmly. "It's accurate. You claim to be Native American. You used it to get hired at Harvard. You listed yourself as a minority on faculty directories. You built your early academic career on claiming Cherokee heritage when you had no legitimate claim to it." He showed Harvard's diversity reports from the 1990s, official university documents that his team had obtained through FOIA requests to a public institution. Faculty listings showing Elizabeth Warren listed as Native American, counted in Harvard's diversity statistics, featured in promotional materials about their commitment to hiring women of color. Harvard thought they were hiring a minority candidate, Trump said. They counted you in their diversity statistics, used you in recruiting materials, pointed to you as evidence of their commitment to diversity. Because you told them you were Native American. You let them believe you were Cherokee even though you had no legitimate tribal affiliation, no connection to Native American communities, no basis for the claim except family stories that turned out to be false. Warren tried to explain, falling back on the defense she'd used before. "My family told me stories about our heritage," she said. "I grew up with those stories, I believed them, I had no reason to doubt." "You took a DNA test," Trump interrupted, pulling out the results, her own DNA test results that she'd released herself in 2018 thinking they would vindicate her. "Made a big show of it, released it yourself. And what did it show?" He read from the results, making sure the audience heard every word. "You are somewhere between 164th and 1024th Native American. That means you have less Native American ancestry than the average white American." "Less than average," Trump repeated, letting that sink in. "The average white American has more Native American DNA than you do. But you used minority status for decades. Let Harvard count you as a woman of color. Let them use you in diversity reports. Took a position that should have gone to an actual Native American candidate." The Cherokee Nation put out a statement. Trump continued, showing the official statement from the Cherokee Nation responding to Warren's DNA test and her claims. Said you are not Cherokee. Said you dishonored real Native Americans by claiming their heritage for professional advantage. Said using a DNA test to claim tribal heritage is inappropriate and offensive to people who actually belong to tribal nations. "But you didn't apologize," Trump said. "You called it a mistake. You said you were sorry if anyone was offended. But you didn't admit that you'd spent decades exploiting a false claim for professional benefit, getting hired as a diversity candidate when you weren't actually diverse, taking opportunities that should have gone to real minority candidates. Decades of lying about your heritage," Trump said, "was just a mistake to you." Warren was visibly shaking now, her face red, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "My family history," she started to say. "Your family history doesn't make you Native American any more than my liking tacos makes me Mexican," Trump said, cutting her off with the blunt comparison. "You lied about your heritage. You got caught when you took that DNA test. And you still won't fully own it. Still won't admit that you exploited a false minority status for professional gain throughout your academic career." Trump stepped back from the table, gestured at all the evidence spread across it, contracts with corporate letterheads, tax returns showing millions in corporate income, trading records showing suspicious timing, settlement documents showing political money flows, employment applications listing false minority status. A career's worth of contradiction between Warren's public image as a champion of working families and her private actions helping corporations hurt workers. "So, Senator," Trump said, addressing her directly but really speaking to the cameras and the audience and the millions watching at home, "you spent an hour tonight telling America I'm corrupt, telling these good people that I sold out to corporations, that I betrayed working families, that I'm everything wrong with American politics. Let's review what we've learned about you in the last 30 minutes. He counted on his fingers, making each point distinct and memorable. "You made $10 million from corporations you now attack. Travelers Insurance, Dow Chemical, LTV Steel, helping them avoid paying workers and victims. You built a federal agency that funneled $5 billion to political groups instead of returning money to consumers who were harmed. You committed insider trading on Senate Banking Committee, made $2.4 million trading on classified information. You lied about being Native American to advance your academic career, exploited false minority status for professional gain. And you did all of this, Trump continued, while positioning yourself as the champion of working people, as the consumer advocate, as the professor who understood economics and fought for families. You lived in a mansion while lecturing others about inequality. You made millions from corporations while attacking corporate greed. You used government power to fund political allies while claiming to protect consumers. You traded on insider information while claiming to fight corruption. The hypocrisy is total, and it's documented. Not with partisan accusations, but with your own records, your own signatures, your own trades, your own words in legal documents. He turned to the audience, making eye contact with people throughout the hall. She lives in a $5 million mansion in Cambridge, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in one of the most expensive cities in America. She's worth $12 million from her corporate consulting and her Senate salary and her book deals and her speaking fees. She makes $400,000 a year from Harvard to teach one seminar, one class, while other professors teach full course loads for a fraction of that salary. But she's going to fight for working families from her mansion while trading on insider information and funneling billions to political groups. Warren stood up abruptly, unable to sit still anymore, unable to maintain the pretense of calm discussion. Her voice was shaking with anger or fear or both, emotions overwhelming her professorial control. "This is character assassination," she said. "This is exactly what happens when you challenge powerful interests. They dig through decades of work, they twist everything, they take things out of context." "I didn't twist anything." Trump remained seated, his voice calm and steady, providing a stark contrast to Warren's visible agitation. "I showed your contracts, real legal documents with your signature. I showed your tax returns, your own disclosures of income from corporations. I showed your trades, your own required disclosures showing when you bought and sold stocks. I showed your employment applications, your own statements about your heritage. These are facts, not characterizations. Public records, not accusations. Your signature on documents. If those facts make you look bad, that's not my fault, that's yours." The audience was riveted now. This had gone from a town hall to something else entirely. A prosecution, an exposure, a moment when pretense fell away, and people saw behind the carefully constructed image. 200 people watching a political figure who'd built her career on moral authority confronting evidence she couldn't explain away, watching her composure crumble under the weight of her own contradictions. Warren looked at Cooper desperately, searching for help, searching for some way to escape this. "Anderson, this is not a legitimate town hall," she said. "This is an ambush, this is." "These are documents Mr. Trump has presented," Cooper said carefully, trying to maintain some journalistic neutrality. "Do you want to specifically address any of the allegations? The trading, the corporate consulting, the CFPB settlements, the Native American claims?" "I have addressed them," Warren said, her voice rising to near shouting. "He's mischaracterizing legal work that was completely proper. He's taking trades out of context. He's—" An audience member shouted from the Democratic section, someone who'd applauded Warren an hour earlier. "Did you make $10 million from corporations or not?" It was a simple question, the kind Warren had been asking other people all night, the kind of direct question that demanded a direct answer. Warren turned toward the voice, saw it was a middle-aged woman who looked like she might be a teacher or a nurse, someone from the working class Warren claimed to represent. "I provided expert legal testimony, which is a standard." "Yes or no?" Several audience members called out simultaneously, Democrats and independents both wanting a direct answer. "Did you make $10 million from corporations? Yes or no?" Warren's composure was fully cracking now, the careful control she'd maintained for decades as a professor and politician dissolving under the simple demand for a simple answer. "It's not a yes or no question," she said desperately. "Bankruptcy law is complex, expert testimony requires." "It is a yes or no question," Trump said quietly, but his voice carried across the silent hall. You made $10.3 million from corporations. Yes or no? You traded stocks after classified briefings. Yes or no? You lied about being Native American. Yes or no? Those are all yes or no questions, Professor. And you know the answers. The answers are all yes. You just don't want to say yes because saying yes means admitting everything I've shown tonight is true. For the next 15 minutes, Elizabeth Warren tried every defense she'd ever used, every tactic that had worked in Senate hearings when she was interrogating bank CEOs, every professorial explanation that had convinced students and voters throughout her academic and political career. None of it worked. She tried the victim narrative, positioning herself as someone being unfairly attacked for challenging power. This is what the powerful do when you threaten them, she said. They attack you with false accusations. They dig up things from decades ago and twist them to make you look. An audience member interrupted, a man in his 60s who looked like he might be a retired union worker. How is showing your tax returns a false accusation? Those are your numbers, your corporate income, your trades, your signatures on contracts. He's not making anything up, he's showing your own records. She tried to reframe, to redirect attention back to Trump's corruption instead of her own. The real issue here is that Donald Trump is trying to distract from his own record of another voice from the audience, younger, probably an independent voter. We just watched you for an hour talking about his corruption. Now he's showing us yours with actual documents. Answer the questions. Did you make 10 million from corporations while claiming to fight them? She tried technical explanations, falling back on her academic expertise as if complex language would obscure simple truth. In bankruptcy proceedings, expert witnesses are engaged to provide testimony on matters of law and procedure. Trump cut through it immediately, translating her academic language into terms everyone could understand. You help Travelers Insurance avoid paying asbestos victims. You can use all the fancy legal language you want. You can talk about complex proceedings and expert testimony, but that's what you did. You helped a corporation avoid paying dying workers. Yes or no? Warren's voice was rising, losing the controlled professor tone that had defined her public persona. I provided analysis in a legally complex situation where multiple competing claims. Yes or no? Trump repeated. Did you help Travelers Insurance minimize what they paid to asbestos victims? Yes or no? Did you make $212,000 for that work? Yes or no? Are those facts or not? It's not that simple, Warren said, almost pleading now. It is that simple, Trump said. You keep saying you fight for working people, but you made 10 million helping corporations fight against working people. You keep saying you're a consumer advocate, but you built a federal agency that funneled billions to political groups instead of consumers. You keep saying you're honest, but you lied about your heritage for professional gain. That's not complex. That's hypocrisy. Cooper tried one more time to moderate, to give Warren a chance to respond coherently. Senator Warren, I think what the audience is asking for is a direct response to the dollar amounts and the timing. Did you receive these payments from these corporations? Did you trade stocks after classified briefings? Did you list yourself as Native American at Harvard? These are factual questions that can be answered directly. Warren looked at Cooper like he'd betrayed her, like CNN was supposed to be friendly territory, like she should be protected from this kind of aggressive questioning. But even Cooper, even a mainstream media institution that generally favored Democrats, couldn't ignore evidence sitting on the table in front of cameras, couldn't pretend that signed contracts and tax returns and trade disclosures and employment records were just Republican talking points. I received fees for expert testimony in bankruptcy cases, Warren said finally, her voice barely steady. That is standard practice for law professors who have specialized expertise. There's nothing improper about it. Did you receive $212,000 from Travelers Insurance? Trump asked directly, not accepting her general answer, demanding specificity. Yes or no, Senator? Silence. Warren staring at him, her mind racing for some way to answer that wouldn't damn her. Yes or no, Trump repeated. The contract is right here with your signature and the dollar amount. Either you're going to confirm it or you're going to call it a forgery. Which is it? Warren's hands were shaking visibly. She looked at her staff in the wings, but they were helpless. There was no spin for this. The documents were real and everyone could see them on monitors throughout the hall. I received payment for legal services, she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. $212,000 from Travelers Insurance. Yes or no? Yes, Warren said, the word forced out. But the context. Thank you, Trump said, moving on before she could try to explain. Did you funnel $5.4 billion through CFPB to political organizations instead of returning it to consumers? Her face flushed. They were consumer protection organizations providing housing counseling and financial literacy. La Raza is a consumer protection organization, Trump said. They provide housing counseling and community services. They're a political advocacy group, Trump said flatly. Yes or no? Did CFPB settlements direct billions to La Raza and Urban League and other progressive political organizations? Yes or no? Warren stood up again, couldn't stay seated, needed to feel like she had some control even as control was slipping away completely. I'm not going to play this game where you reduce complex policy questions to simple yes or no. Did you trade stocks after classified banking committee briefings? Trump interrupted. Yes or no? My financial advisor manages my investments based on. Yes or no? Trump repeated. Did you trade stocks after attending classified briefings where you learned information about upcoming regulations and market conditions? Yes or no? Not Republican spin, not partisan accusations, just a simple factual question. Did those trades happen? Warren's voice cracked, emotion finally overwhelming her professional control. You're not going to bully me with. An audience member stood up, a woman in her 50s, working class by her appearance and her worn clothing. I voted for you, she called out, her voice carrying clearly. I gave you money for your Senate campaign and your presidential campaign. I believed you were different. I believed you really were fighting for people like me. Did you trade on insider information or not? Just tell us. Stop with the complicated explanations. Did you or didn't you? Warren looked at the woman and saw betrayal in her face, saw the same expression on faces throughout the audience, people who'd believed in her, who'd thought she represented them, who donated to her campaigns and volunteered for her and defended her against Republican attacks. These weren't Trump supporters trying to take her down. These were her own supporters demanding answers. I followed all legal guidelines for congressional trading, Warren said, trying one more time to hide behind technical compliance. That's not an answer, the woman shouted. You spent an hour telling us Trump is corrupt. Are you corrupt too? Did you make millions from corporations while claiming to fight them? Did you trade on secret information? Just tell the truth. Warren's eyes were wet now. Whether from anger or shame or fear, it was impossible to tell. I have spent my entire career fighting for working families, she said, her voice breaking. Everything I've done has been in service of making the economy work for regular people instead of just the wealthy and powerful. You made $10 million from corporations, Trump said quietly, his voice cutting through her rising emotion like a knife. That's a fact. You funneled $5 billion to political groups. That's a fact. You traded after classified briefings. That's a fact. Those aren't characterizations or interpretations. Those are facts, your facts from your records, your signatures, your trades, your money. Warren turned on him with sudden fury, abandoning any pretense of professorial calm. You want to talk about facts, she said, her voice shaking. You're a failed businessman who bankrupted casinos. You're a reality TV star who never worked an honest day in your life. I'm not the one on trial here tonight, Trump said calmly, not taking the bait, not letting her redirect. You are, because you spent an hour attacking me and I responded with evidence. Real evidence. Your contracts showing corporate payments. Your trades showing suspicious timing. Your settlement documents showing where CFPB money went. Your employment records showing false minority claims. That's the difference between us, Professor. When you attack me, you use rhetoric and talking points. When I respond, I use receipts. The audience reacted, some applause, some gasps, everyone riveted by what they were watching. Cooper tried one final time to give Warren a chance to respond coherently. Senator, if you could just address the specific allegations about the dollar amounts and the timing. Warren looked at Cooper, looked at Trump, looked at the audience that had cheered her an hour ago and now sat in judgment. She made a decision. I'm not going to participate in this circus anymore, she said, and she walked off stage. Not a graceful exit, not a strategic retreat like a politician who decided to take the high road. Just walking away mid-confrontation, mid-question, mid-town hall, with Trump still standing there with his folder of evidence, with questions still hanging in the air, with documents still spread across the table that she couldn't deny. The audience didn't know how to react. Some started to applaud Warren's exit, but stopped when they realized she looked like she was fleeing, not departing with dignity. Some whispered to each other, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Most just sat in stunned silence. Cooper looked at his producers in the control room, looked at Trump standing at the table, looked at the empty chair where Warren had been sitting minutes before. Nobody had a script for this. No town hall had ever ended this way. Trump gathered his documents back into his folder, straightened the papers methodically, spoke to Cooper but really to the cameras, to the millions watching at home. "She wanted to talk about corruption, Anderson," he said. "We talked about it. Her corruption. 10 million from corporations she now attacks. 5 billion funneled to political groups. 2.4 million from insider trading. False claims about her heritage for professional gain. And when confronted with evidence she couldn't deny, she ran away. Can't answer simple questions about her own record, so she walks off stage." He closed the folder, walked off stage himself. Not rushed, not dramatic, just a man who'd accomplished what he came to do. The camera stayed on the empty stage, on the empty chairs, on the space where minutes before America had watched a senator be destroyed by her own contradictions. Cooper tried to wrap up, stammered through some closing remarks about unprecedented events and complex allegations, but everyone knew the only thing that mattered had already happened. Warren had been exposed, confronted with evidence she couldn't deny, and instead of explaining, she'd fled. Within minutes, the video was uploading to every platform, not edited by partisan operatives, just raw footage from CNN's official feed. Elizabeth Warren being systematically confronted with documents showing corporate payments and suspicious trades and false heritage claims. Her growing panic visible on her face. Her inability to answer simple yes or no questions. Her final decision to walk away mid-town hall rather than keep trying to explain the unexplainable. The clip went viral immediately. 10 million views in the first hour as people shared it on social media, with comments ranging from shock to vindication to disappointment. By morning, it had 50 million views. By the end of the week, 100 million, becoming one of those rare political moments that transcends partisan divides because the evidence is so clear and the contrast so stark. Not because of clever editing or selective quotation, but because millions of people watched the raw footage of a politician who'd built her career on moral authority being confronted with comprehensive evidence of hypocrisy and having no answer. The first call came at 11 p.m. that night while Warren was still in her hotel room in Atlanta. Her staff clustered around trying to figure out damage control, trying to draft statements, trying to decide whether to push back or apologize or ignore. Her phone rang, blocked number. She almost didn't answer, then thought maybe it was someone from the Senate or from the Massachusetts delegation or someone who could help. "Elizabeth, it's Nancy. Nancy Pelosi, former speaker, still the most powerful Democrat in Congress even in retirement, still the person whose opinion mattered most in Democratic politics." Warren felt a surge of hope, thinking maybe Pelosi was calling to offer support, to say she'd faced unfair attacks before and survived, to provide advice on spinning this. "Nancy, thank God," Warren said. "I need to talk to someone who understands that what happened tonight was." "I need you to listen," Pelosi said, her voice cold as winter, cutting through Warren's hope. "What happened tonight was a disaster. Not for Trump, for you, for the party. You went on national television and couldn't answer basic questions about your finances, about your corporate work, about your trading. You made the Democratic Party look like we're just as corrupt as Republicans." "He ambushed me with documents I didn't know he had," Warren tried to explain. "He showed your tax returns," Pelosi said flatly, "your contracts, your trades, your employment records. Those aren't ambush materials, Elizabeth, those are your records. Public information you had to disclose, and you couldn't explain them. You couldn't give straight answers to straight questions. You looked guilty because you are guilty of exactly what he accused you of." Warren felt tears threatening, felt her career crumbling. "Nancy, I tried to explain, but he wouldn't let me. He kept interrupting." You couldn't explain because there is no explanation, Pelosi said. You made millions from corporations while attacking corporations. You funneled billions through CFPB to political groups while claiming to protect consumers. You traded on classified information while serving on banking committee. Elizabeth, I've been in politics for 40 years. I know corruption when I see it, and tonight America saw it in you. Nancy, please, Warren said. The Senate Democratic Caucus is meeting tomorrow, Pelosi continued. There will be calls for you to step down from banking committee at minimum. Maybe calls for you to step down from other committees. Maybe calls for your resignation. I can't protect you from that. I won't protect you from that because you did this to yourself. You built your career on self-righteousness and moral superiority, and now everyone knows you were profiting from the same corporations you attacked. That's not a political problem, Elizabeth. That's a character problem. The line went dead. Pelosi had hung up. Warren stared at her phone, feeling the full weight of what had happened beginning to settle on her. Nancy Pelosi, the ultimate Democratic loyalist, the person who defended Democrats through every scandal and every attack, had just abandoned her. After one night, after one town hall, because the evidence was too clear and the hypocrisy too total. Her chief of staff was watching CNN on his laptop, turned it so Warren could see. Every show was covering it, not just Fox News gleefully playing the clips and bringing on Republican guests to attack her. MSNBC and CNN, networks that normally defended Democrats, were showing the evidence, the contracts, the trades, the numbers. Commentators who'd supported Warren for years were saying things like this is very damaging, and she needs to provide better explanations, and the documents raise serious questions. Warren exposed, the corporate consultant who became consumer advocate, read one chyron at the bottom of MSNBC. Senator Warren unable to explain $10 million in corporate payments, read another on CNN. Did Elizabeth Warren commit insider trading? Asked a third. Her phone kept ringing, reporters, staffers, donors, allies, everyone wanting a statement or an explanation or just wanting to know what happened. She stopped answering, let it ring and ring, each call a reminder of how completely everything had fallen apart in just 2 hours. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, Warren checked social media against her staff's advice. It was brutal, even worse than the television coverage. The video had been clipped into dozens of segments, each one showing her failing to answer a question, each one showing her growing panic, each one showing the moment when she walked off stage looking like she was fleeing rather than departing with dignity. She looked guilty because she is guilty had 50,000 retweets. Harvard professor who made $10 million from corporations lectures us about greed had 70,000. The look on her face when Trump asked yes or no was already a meme with 100,000 shares. Even progressives who'd supported her, who defended her through the Pocahontas controversy and the presidential campaign disappointments, were turning. I defended her through everything. One popular progressive activist tweeted, I can't defend this. The evidence is real. The contracts have her signature. The trades happened after classified briefings. This isn't Republican spin, this is her record. That tweet had been retweeted by major progressive influencers, by people who'd raised money for her campaigns, by activists who'd volunteered for her. By morning, the polling was devastating. Her favorability had dropped 23 points overnight. Among Democrats, she'd fallen from 83% favorable to 52%. Among all voters, she was underwater, 38% favorable, 57% unfavorable. But worse than the polling were the calls from donors, major donors who'd supported her Senate campaigns, who'd been ready to fund a presidential run in 2028, who'd believed in her economic justice message. Elizabeth, this is Tom Steyer, billionaire progressive donor who'd given her campaigns millions over the years. I can't support you anymore, Steyer said without preamble. What Trump showed last night, the CFPB money going to political groups, I funded some of those groups. I gave money to La Raza and Urban League. This makes all of us look corrupt, makes it look like we were part of some scheme to use federal agencies to fund progressive activism. I can't be associated with that. Tom, if you'll just let me explain the context, Warren tried. There's nothing to explain, Steyer said. The settlements are public record. The organizations are political. You designed a federal agency to fund progressive activism with bank settlement money. That's corruption, Elizabeth. I built my reputation on clean government and transparency. I can't be associated with this. Click. Another call, this one even worse. Senator Warren, this is Michael Bloomberg. Even Bloomberg, who'd run against her in the Democratic primary, who'd been on the receiving end of her attacks about billionaires buying elections. Your CFPB scheme was brilliant actually, Bloomberg said, his tone almost admiring. Forcing banks to pay progressive groups instead of consumers. Very creative use of regulatory power. But now that it's exposed, every Democrat is going to face questions about whether we support using federal agencies as political slush funds. You've handed Republicans ammunition for a generation. Every Democratic regulator will be suspected of political bias. Every agency settlement will be scrutinized. You've poisoned the well for all of us. Click. By end of day 1, Warren had lost 15 major donors. By end of week 1, 47 donors had publicly announced they were no longer supporting her, and many had issued statements distancing themselves from her economic justice agenda that now seemed tainted by association with her corruption. Day 3, the Senate Ethics Committee announced a formal investigation into her trading. Not partisan Republicans launching a witch hunt, but the Bipartisan Ethics Committee, including 3 Democrats, voting unanimously to investigate whether Warren had violated the Stock Act through her pattern of trading after classified banking committee briefings. Day 5, the Securities and Exchange Commission confirmed they were reviewing her trading records for potential insider trading violations. The Stock Act was clear about prohibiting members of Congress from trading on non-public information. The pattern Trump had exposed met the legal definition. SEC was opening a formal investigation that could result in fines or referral for criminal prosecution. Day 7, Warren held a press conference in Boston trying to get ahead of the story, trying to control the narrative, trying to provide the explanations she hadn't been able to articulate during the town hall. It went even worse than CNN. Reporters who'd been friendly to her for years were asking the same questions Trump had asked, demanding the same simple answers she still couldn't give. Senator, did you or did you not make $212,000 from Travelers Insurance? Asked a reporter from the Boston Globe, a paper that had endorsed her repeatedly. Warren began, I provided expert testimony in a complex bankruptcy case involving. Yes or no, the reporter interrupted. Did they pay you $212,000? It's not a yes or no question, Warren said, falling back on the same evasion she'd used at the town hall. It literally is, another reporter called out. Did they pay you that amount? Yes or no? That's a simple factual question. Warren tried to pivot to attacking Trump, tried to make this about partisan warfare instead of her own record. The real issue here is that Donald Trump is trying to distract from his own corruption by. Senator, with respect, Trump isn't here, a third reporter said. We're asking you about your record, about contracts with your signature, about trades you made, about money you received. Did you make $10 million from corporations while building a career attacking those same corporations? Can you just answer that directly? The press conference lasted 12 minutes before her staff ended it, pulling her away from the microphones as reporters kept shouting questions she wouldn't answer. The video went viral immediately. Warren unable to give straight answers to straight questions again, looking evasive, looking guilty, looking like someone with something to hide. Day 10, Harvard announced they were placing her on administrative leave pending a review of her hiring and her use of minority status in faculty diversity reports. The 1995 diversity report that listed her as Native American was getting renewed scrutiny, with Native American groups demanding Harvard investigate whether Warren had committed fraud to get hired, whether she'd taken a position that should have gone to an actual Native American candidate. Day 14, Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader, called her into his office for a meeting everyone knew would be difficult. Elizabeth, Schumer began without preamble, the caucus met yesterday. The votes aren't there to keep you on banking committee. There are calls to remove you from every committee. Some members are calling for your resignation. Chuck, you can't, Warren said desperately. I can't protect you, Schumer said flatly. The evidence Trump showed isn't going away. It's all public record. Your contracts, your trades, your tax returns, your settlement documents. Every Democrat on banking committee is facing questions about whether they knew about your trading. Every Democrat is facing questions about whether they support using CFPB as a political slush fund. You're toxic, Elizabeth. You're making it impossible for the rest of us to function. How long do I have? Warren asked quietly. Banking committee vote is Monday, Schumer said. You'll be removed. Then probably judiciary within a month, finance after that. You'll end up with no committee assignments except maybe something minor nobody cares about. Warren felt the walls closing in. So I'm just a backbencher with no power, no committees, no influence. You're lucky if you're that, Schumer said. There are members calling for your resignation. Not expulsion. They know they don't have the votes for that, but strong public calls for you to resign. And those calls are coming from Democrats, Elizabeth, from your own party, from people who think you've betrayed progressive values and made us all look like hypocrites. Warren left Schumer's office in a daze, walked through the Capitol hallways where staffers and senators avoided eye contact, where she'd once been greeted warmly but now people found reasons to turn down other corridors, to suddenly remember meetings they had to get to avoid having to acknowledge her presence. Week 3, her book sales collapsed. Fighting Chance and her other books about economic justice had sold steadily for years, generating significant royalty income. Now bookstores were returning them in bulk, not wanting to stock books by an author associated with corruption. Amazon reviews became vicious. Thousands of one-star reviews with titles like How to Profit from Corporations While Pretending to Fight Them, getting tens of thousands of upvotes from people who felt betrayed. Her speaking fees evaporated. Universities that had paid her $50,000 per speech to talk about economic inequality and consumer protection were canceling events. In light of recent revelations about Senator Warren's corporate consulting work and Senate trading, we've decided to go in a different direction. Read typical cancellation emails. Nobody wanted to be associated with her. Nobody wanted to give her a platform. Nobody wanted to defend inviting her to speak about corruption when she was corrupt. Week 4, her Massachusetts approval rating hit 32%. In Massachusetts, one of the bluest states in America, a state she'd won with 64% of the vote. Now 2/3 of her own constituents disapproved of her job performance and wanted her to resign or not run for re-election. The Boston Globe, which had endorsed her repeatedly, ran an editorial calling for her resignation. Senator Warren built her career attacking corporate corruption while secretly profiting from it. The editorial concluded, "This betrayal of public trust is disqualifying. She should resign and allow Massachusetts voters to elect someone who actually represents their values." Week 5, the New York Times published a comprehensive investigation that 3 reporters had spent weeks on, tracking down every corporate client Warren had worked for, every dollar she'd earned, every case where she'd helped corporations avoid liability. The Professor's Profit: How Elizabeth Warren Made Millions from Corporate America was the headline. The article was devastating. 12,000 words documenting client after client, case after case, payment after payment, showing that the $10.3 million Trump had cited was actually conservative because there were additional smaller payments that added up to even more. In many of these cases, workers or victims ended up getting less money because of Warren's expert testimony helping corporations restructure. The article documented. The Harvard professor who'd later position herself as a champion of workers was helping corporations cut worker benefits and minimize payments to victims. And the most damning quote came from a former steel worker. "I voted for Warren, I gave her money. I believe she was fighting for people like me," he told the Times. "Now I find out she helped my company cut my pension. I lost $20,000 a year in retirement income because of restructuring she helped design, and she made $90,000 from it. I feel betrayed." Week 6, Senate Ethics Committee issued its preliminary findings while the investigation was ongoing. Senator Warren's trading activity shows a pattern consistent with trading on material non-public information obtained through her banking committee work. The report stated, "While we have not completed our investigation, The evidence gathered thus far raises serious questions about violations of the Stock Act and Senate ethics rules. 23 trades coming within days of classified briefings, all of them profitable or loss-avoiding, suggests either systematic insider trading or impossible luck. Week 8, Warren sat in her Cambridge house, the $5.4 million house that had become a symbol of her hypocrisy, reading the latest polling. Her 2028 presidential chances were at 0%, literally zero. Pollsters had stopped including her name in surveys because she was irrelevant. But worse, her re-election chances in Massachusetts were underwater. If the election were today, she'd lose by 15 points to any generic Republican challenger. Massachusetts, deep blue Massachusetts that hadn't elected a Republican senator in decades, would rather have someone from the other party than keep her. Her marriage was fracturing under the pressure. Bruce, her husband, had been supportive at first, but the scrutiny was destroying their lives. Reporters camped outside their house every day. Their neighbors avoided them, stopped inviting them to neighborhood gatherings, crossed the street rather than have to make small talk. Their friends from Harvard had stopped calling, unwilling to be associated with someone accused of corruption and fraud. "I can't do this anymore, Elizabeth," Bruce said one evening as they sat in their living room with curtains drawn so reporters couldn't photograph them. "We can't go anywhere, can't do anything, can't have a normal life. Our friends won't talk to us. Strangers recognize you and yell insults. How long is this going to last?" "It's temporary," Warren said without conviction. "This will blow over eventually. People will forget." "It's been 2 months," Bruce said. "It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Every day there's a new article, a new investigation, a new revelation about money you made or trades you did. Our lives are destroyed. When does it end?" Warren had no answer because she didn't know. The Senate ethics investigation was ongoing. The SEC investigation was ongoing. The Harvard review was ongoing. The Massachusetts bar investigation was ongoing. Every day brought new subpoenas, new requests for documents, new depositions, new opportunities for more damaging information to come out. Week 10, Politico published a story about the Warren effect on Democratic fundraising nationwide. How one senator's corruption scandal is poisoning Democratic fundraising was the headline. The article documented how major donors were now asking every candidate detailed questions. Did you ever take money from CFPB-funded organizations? Do you support using regulatory settlements to fund political groups? Have you ever traded stocks while serving on committees with access to classified information? Questions nobody had asked before Warren's scandal, but that were now standard vetting for anyone seeking Democratic donor support. Warren has become such political poison that Democrats are running away from positions they held 6 months ago, the article concluded. Progressive economic policy has been tainted by association with her corruption. Her fall hasn't just ended her own career, it's damaged the broader progressive movement by making economic justice rhetoric seem hypocritical. Candidates who used to talk about fighting corporate greed now avoid the topic, because voters associate it with Warren, who said those words while profiting from corporations. Week 12, Warren made her final decision. She couldn't win re-election, the polling made that clear. Couldn't function in the Senate with no committee assignments and her own party wanting her gone. Couldn't show her face in public without reporters shouting questions and strangers yelling insults. Couldn't even stay married to a man who was done with the scrutiny and ready to leave. She called Chuck Schumer from her Cambridge home. "I'm going to resign," she said simply. Silence on the line for several seconds. Then when Schumer asked, "End of the month," Warren replied, "I'll announce next week, then serve out until my replacement can be arranged." "Elizabeth," Schumer started to say. "No, you're not sorry," Warren interrupted. "Nobody is. Everyone's relieved I'm finally leaving, finally getting out of the way so the party can move on without me dragging you down." She hung up before he could respond, before he could pretend to be sorry, before he could offer empty condolences for a career destroyed by exposure of corruption. The resignation announcement came on a Friday afternoon, standard timing for news you want to minimize, news you hope will get lost in the weekend news cycle. Not a press conference, just a written statement released through her Senate office website. After much reflection and consultation with my family, I have decided not to seek re-election to the United States Senate. I will resign my seat effective at the end of this month. I am proud of the work I've done to fight for working families, to hold corporations accountable, to build a more just economy. I leave public service knowing I gave everything to the fights I believed in. No mention of the investigations, no mention of the evidence Trump had presented, no mention of the corporate money or the insider trading or the false heritage claims. Just the same rhetoric about fighting for working families that now rang completely hollow to everyone who'd seen the contracts and the trades and the tax returns. The same claims about holding corporations accountable from someone who'd made millions helping corporations avoid accountability. The same talk about building a just economy from someone who'd enriched herself through corruption. The media reaction was universal relief, not sympathy or respect for a career of public service, but simple relief that she was finally leaving. Warren's long overdue exit read one headline. Finally, Senator Warren does the right thing read another. Even sympathetic outlets couldn't muster much defense. Elizabeth Warren's resignation ends one of the most spectacular political implosions in modern American history, wrote a Politico columnist who'd previously supported her. She went from presidential frontrunner to disgraced former senator in 12 weeks. The speed of her fall is matched only by its completeness. She's not retiring with dignity. She's fleeing in disgrace from a scandal she can't spin away, from evidence she can't deny, from constituents who feel betrayed. On her last day in the Senate, Warren walked through the halls one final time, packed up her office while staff members boxed up books and files and mementos from 10 years of service. No other senators came to her office to say goodbye, no farewell reception, no tribute on the Senate floor like there would have been for a respected colleague. She just packed her things and left through a side entrance to avoid reporters, drove back to Cambridge in a car with tinted windows, retreated to a house that had become a prison. 6 months after the CNN town hall, Elizabeth Warren was living quietly in her Cambridge house, leaving rarely, groceries delivered, no public appearances, no interviews, no statements. The investigations had concluded. SEC had fined her $3.2 million for insider trading, a penalty that hurt financially but was lighter than it could have been. Senate Ethics Committee had issued a formal rebuke, meaningless since she'd resigned but still part of the official record. Massachusetts Bar had suspended her law license for 5 years. Harvard had revoked her tenure and terminated her employment, citing fraud in her original hiring through false claims about minority status. She'd sold her other properties to pay legal fees and fines and divorce settlement. Bruce had moved out west somewhere, didn't tell her where, didn't want her knowing, wanted to start over far from the scandal. Her net worth had dropped from $12 million to maybe $4 million after selling assets and paying penalties. Still rich by normal standards, but not rich enough to feel secure, not rich enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd built, not rich enough to insulate herself from consequences. Her political career was over. Her academic career was over. Her reputation was destroyed. Elizabeth Warren had gone from a name associated with fighting for working families and challenging corporate power to a name synonymous with hypocrisy and corruption. And it had all happened because she'd attacked Donald Trump's corruption on national television, and he'd responded by systematically exposing hers with documents she couldn't deny in front of an audience she couldn't escape. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who studied political history. The professor who'd built a career explaining how systems were rigged had rigged multiple systems in her own favor. The consumer advocate had been a corporate hired gun helping companies hurt consumers. The champion of working families had made millions from corporations that exploited workers. The woman who attacked inequality had lived in a mansion while lecturing others about greed. The fighter against insider trading had committed insider trading. The advocate for transparency had hidden her corporate work and her false heritage claims for decades until Trump exposed them. Trump had destroyed her career not through lies or distortion, but through truth. Through her own contracts, her own tax returns, her own trades, her own employment applications, her own signatures on documents proving everything he'd accused her of. The Harvard professor who'd spent her career teaching others about law and justice had been judged by those same standards and found guilty of violating them. The righteous crusader against corruption had been revealed as corrupt. The champion of working people had profited from their exploitation. 1 year after the town hall, CNN ran a documentary special called The Night Elizabeth Warren's Career Died, a retrospective examining how one evening had ended a political career that had seemed destined for higher office. The show reconstructed everything: Warren's preparation and confidence going into the town hall, Trump's months of opposition research discovering her corporate work and insider trading, the ambush that wasn't really an ambush because it only used public records, the confrontation where Warren had no answers, the aftermath that saw her lose donors and support and committee assignments, and finally her Senate seat. The conclusion of the documentary was stark. Warren's fall wasn't tragic in the classical sense, it was deserved. She'd spent years attacking others for sins she was committing on a larger scale. She'd positioned herself as morally superior while behaving hypocritically. She'd built a brand around fighting corporate corruption while secretly profiting from it. Trump didn't destroy her career through unfair attacks. He simply exposed who she really was. Her career destroyed itself. The only tragedy was that it took so long for the truth to come out. In her Cambridge house, Warren watched the documentary on her laptop, wanting to write a response, wanting to defend herself, wanting to explain, wanting to tell her side of the story. But there was nothing to say. The evidence was public, the investigations had confirmed it all, the voters had rendered their judgment. She'd gone on CNN to attack Trump's corruption and ended up exposing her own. That was the story that would define her. That was the legacy that would follow her. That was the truth that no amount of professorial explanation could make anything other than what it was. A record of hypocrisy and corruption dressed up as public service and moral authority, until someone bothered to look beneath the surface and document what was really there.